Welcome back to World Beater Wrestling. Today's episode is a bit of an update on the future direction of this channel. Some very important stuff, a lot of big changes coming. And then at the end, I'm going to go through a Q&A for some questions that I've received over the last few weeks and months on this channel and elsewhere. So from now moving forwards, my weekly series will be exclusive to my worldbeaterwrestling.com Patreon. The Patreon is something that I've been putting a lot of time and effort into over the last 8 months and trying to grow it because I see a lot of potential beyond just random weekly tutorials. And those of you who are already members of the Patreon, you would have seen so many things from ebooks to instructionals, which has never been done before in pro wrestling. Seminars I'm putting out regularly, live trainings weekly, tape studies. There's a whole community, a lot of Q&A and discussion and conversation. And on top of that, I mentor people as part of their membership as well. I feel like I've been spinning my wheels a little too much by putting so many things out on so many different platforms that I really want to streamline it into the one place and just have that all in one community platform where you can just see everything, and this will allow me to do bigger and better things. Now, the videos that do exist currently on this YouTube channel, I think there's over 300, they will still exist. They'll still sit there. They'll still be there if you want to go back and watch them. And you know, every now and then I will put out new videos on the channel, just not as regularly as I have been. You know, there's no need to unsubscribe. You're still going to get lots of great content for free as being a subscriber of the YouTube channel, but you know, we're moving things in a slightly different direction. I'll also mention that on the worldbeaterwrestling.com Patreon, I do have 7-day free trials available for the month of June. So if you want to check it out before you commit, absolutely go ahead and let me know what you think. But now for the Q&A. So one of the perks of the Patreon is that members do get to ask questions and have them answered. And there's a lot of questions that end up being so detailed that I produce them in long form format in terms of a full episode. But you know, there's other questions that can be answered very quickly, and some that just continually arise through the Patreon and elsewhere. So I tabulated a few of my most commonly asked questions, and I'm going to answer them as quickly as humanly possible. So I'll just grab the MacBook. Don't mind if I do. The first question is, and this is from Brandon Collins on YouTube. Thank you, Brandon. How do heels and babyfaces get over? A fantastic question, a very nuanced question, and a lot of different directions to go. The most simple way I can put it is that babyfaces give the fans what they want and heels take it away. And that's how I generally teach being a heel or a babyface rather than specific character traits. You know, because as we've seen in the past, there are so many character traits that are typically given to villains, but in this era, they get cheered for it. You know, you look at people like even Eddie Guerrero, lies, cheats, and steals, huge babyface. Stone Cold, super aggressive, huge babyface. So if you think more about that and less about character traits, I think you have a better chance of getting over with the crowd or with whichever crowd you're in front of, because context is key, and crowds are different depending on where you go. Can also sometimes come down to your character, and I find that characters that have very human traits, vulnerabilities, that show certain emotions that the fans can connect with, generally have a better opportunity to get over. It needs to be real. You know, you want the fans to feel an emotional connection, and sometimes there is a disconnect when what you're putting out just isn't realistic. It isn't meaningful to your fan base. Look to the real world for inspiration, and when you're designing your character or the way you act or mannerisms or anything, look to the real world and, you know, see what heroes and villains commonly do. What are some things that people connect with outside of pro wrestling? Also, the way you're booked definitely counts, and you do need consistent booking and the right type of booking to get over. And this is where I say just be proactive. You know, pitch ideas, suggest storylines and matches and character development arcs and all sorts of things like that, because you can't always rely on bookers to come up with the right thing for you and your character. Some good warm-ups and cool-downs for matches. I like to use the resistance band a lot when it comes to warm-ups. I wouldn't say that I necessarily do a cool-down after matches, nor do I think I really need to. But yeah, in terms of warm-ups, I like to use the resistance band. I like to run my warm-ups very similar to the warm-ups I use within my pro wrestling training. So, you know, if you've seen some of my shorts or reels online, I've put a lot of stuff out that show a few of my warm-up drills. Essentially, it's getting the body warm, getting the muscles moving, getting the blood flowing. So generally we have small spaces backstage at independent pro wrestling shows. You can't just go for a jog or some side shuffles. So I might do things on the spot like star jumps or jumping jacks if you're in America. High knees, just things I can do on the spot to get the blood flowing. And then from there, I'll start moving into things like plyometrics. It might be, you know, explosive jump squats. It could be things like plyometric push-ups, and then I'll often go into band work, so using very light resistance bands. But I also use it for the aesthetics. You know, you want to get your muscles pumped, you want to get that pump on before you walk out through the curtain and look all jacked and amazing. So I definitely use the bands in there as well. But I typically don't go crazy. I don't do any stretching at all. I don't see the benefit in that, particularly before exercise. I would probably do that afterwards if I did want to use that as a cool down. But some dynamic stretches, some more yoga type positions where I'm kind of flowing through the movement every few seconds, and the holds are progressive. I'm not just holding something for 30 seconds to a minute. That's typically what I would do as part of my warm-up. The next question, are modern hope spots becoming too much like comebacks, then taking away the same energy for the actual comeback? This was asked over on my Discord. A very good question, and I guess in a sense what we're saying is, are wrestlers putting too much into their hope spots in the middle of a heat so that the comeback doesn't really mean anything? I don't know if that's a common thing. From the wrestling I've watched, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's been a problem. However, if you feel like in your wrestling that you might be putting too much into those hope spots, then perhaps it is something you need to analyze. Because the best way to have an effective heat is to make sure that you save the big comeback for the actual comeback, or if it's a tag match, for the actual hot tag. You want to create tension in the heat. And sometimes if you put too much into your hope spots so that they all kind of appear like comebacks, you often take the tension out of that heat and the comeback doesn't get the same response. I've had trainers use the analogy of it's a balloon that's blown up, and during that heat, the balloon gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you don't want to let the air out of the balloon by having that babyface fight back for too long, too often, and there is a fine line with that. So, a tricky question, because, you know, at the same note, and I am going to talk about this in a future episode on effective heats. At the same note, I feel like at this level, at this independent level, I'm talking more like a local scene, I see people fall into the trap of their hope spots being very paint by numbers, very small, short, generic, get put in a chin lock, 3 elbows, hit the ropes, get cut off. Nothing wrong with that, but people have seen it a million times, and no one for a second believes that you're actually going to fight back. And for me, an effective hope spot needs to give some hope. It needs to look like this could be the comeback. So it doesn't mean every hope spot needs to be big and long and complicated, but, you know, maybe right before the actual comeback, you do put in a hope spot that looks like it could be the comeback, and then the heel cuts you off again. But again, you got to find that balance. You can't do that every time. See what works for you and your crowds is what I always say. The next question is how to get inspiration for ring gear. A fantastic question, and I'll give you my straight up answer is I look at various different places. In the past, I have looked at pro wrestlers. I used to go around, and anytime I would see some gear that for whatever reason stood out to me, whether it's the material being used, the colors, the designs, whatever, I would save a picture and basically create a folder on my phone or on my computer that had a list of all these pictures that I could draw from if I needed to. I don't feel like I'm a terribly creative person, so sometimes I just need those little sparks of inspiration before I start designing something. So that's one way. I've also looked at things like video games and pop culture and movies and characters and see what they wear. I feel like that's a good way to be unique and be different. Yeah, don't limit yourself to just pro wrestlers. You never want to kind of be a diet version of another pro wrestler who's already more popular, more well-known than you are. But if you can take little bits from different places, you might actually come up with something really cool and unique. The next question, should I watch all sorts of wrestling or just focus on the characters and styles I resonate with? look, it's easy for me to say, yeah, just watch everything. And I do believe that you should, and it is beneficial to watch things that maybe you don't typically resonate with, because it could give you new ideas, fresh ideas. So you're not just pigeonholing yourself into that one corner. However, very aware that myself included, we do tend to be drawn to things that we like, things that we enjoy. So I can't say don't watch people you resonate with, but just be mindful of that and be careful that if you're only watching one wrestler or one promotion or one style, that you may end up just looking like a copy of something that already exists. But yeah, in general, I believe that people should watch more wrestling, and too many people just don't do it. They put their fan lens on and they watch what they like, and that's it. And I just think there's so much growth that can be made if you do branch out a little bit. How to loosen up in the ring. This is a common one, I think, when people are new to the game. I feel like they often go one of two ways. They either go way too loose or way too stiff and rigid. And it's about finding that happy medium and balance. Look, a lot of it comes down to the feedback you get from your training partners, and generally they'll tell you if you're being too stiff and too heavy, and they'll probably tell you if you're just being a bit too light and could probably turn up the intensity a little bit. One way I've always taught this concept within chain wrestling or grappling is whatever point of contact you have. Let's say it's the arms, you're going for a lockup, it's your hands, your wrists, your arms, your forearm. Keep that loose, but everything else needs to be strong, because if everything is loose, your lockup's going to look sloppy and not quite strong. So, your legs might be strong, your torso might be strong, your facial expressions are strong, but this is actually quite loose. That way, you're not going to end up punching them in the face by mistake. I'm sure many of you have been there before in the early days, and you're still going to have that illusion of a really tough lockup. My early trainers used to say spaghetti arms or noodle arms, so that was a good way to remember that point. The next question is about improving facial expressions and selling. I do have many videos in the archives on the YouTube channel about selling and probably on this point, but to summarize it, I think that it's tough to improve these things unless you can see exactly what you look like. I remember in my early days, I think my second ever match back in 2003, I finally received a copy of my match on VHS. That's how old I am. But I received the copy, and I remember watching it back and just watching my entrance and watching how I got into the ring and having my mind blown by how closed off and unperformative, if that's even a word, I was. Because in my head going out there, I felt like I was, working to the back row. Everything was big, everything was exaggerated. And when I watched it, everything was rushed, everything was closed, and nobody would have had a clue what I was trying to portray. And that's just the difference between what you see in your mind's eye and what is actually visible to people watching you in the audience. So if you can, watch the way that you sell, watch your facial expressions, and just see how you can improve on it. Of course, you could ask for feedback too, but I think if you can see it for yourself, it'll make a little bit more sense. I always say to people before they've wrestled on a show, don't be afraid to set up a camera at training. Obviously ask your coaches first, but if you can set up a little tripod, then perhaps you'll be able to film yourself, watch yourself, and you can refine those little things before you ever make your debut. And generally, just go big with your movements. You might feel silly, you might feel foolish doing it at training, surrounded by your peers, but if you can make it second nature to be performative and be big with your actions, you're not even going to think about it when you're out there in the ring in front of a live audience, and all those other stresses and distractions are at play. And final question is about getting in shape for the ring, overcoming cardio issues, and the question specifically asked, should I just change my gym workouts to be more cardio-based, maybe with some weights thrown into those sessions? Again, a very good question that I could go on for a long time about, and maybe I will put out a future episode about this topic, because I think this is one of the more common things is conditioning and how to get ready for the ring. And I could also say, just train more, just wrestle more, but that's a bit of a cop-out, and there are ways that you can improve on your fitness without ever being inside of a ring. One thing that has helped me is trying to mimic the demands of a pro wrestling performance. So you might say that HIIT training, high intensity interval training, might be the way to go, because if you think of a pro wrestling match, There are often tempo changes throughout. You might be going at full speed for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and then you might have 40 seconds where you slow down the pace, where the heel gets back on top, where you can sell. So I've always tried to mimic this. Personally, I like using the assault bike. It's easy on the joints, terribly hard and difficult, and I've never really enjoyed any other form of cardio in terms of like treadmills and cross trainers and rowing machines and things like that. So the assault bike's a really good one for me. It means I can also control the tempo really well. I can go 20 seconds all out pace, then I can have a 40-second active recovery. Run that for 10 to 20 minutes. It's incredibly difficult, and you can slowly progress on that so that you are making gains in that sense. But I also wouldn't neglect other forms of conditioning training. If you really want to get nerdy and deep with it, I would look into the different energy systems. There are 3 different energy systems, and there are different ways to train them, and all of them are absolutely used in professional wrestling. So interval training is great, but things like low intensity steady state, where you're going at a low intensity for 30 or 40 minutes, can also be very beneficial. And to touch on that little point about maybe scrapping your gym workouts or your resistance training workouts and just doing cardio with weights, I feel like this is a little bit too much, trying to tick every box within one little workout, which just isn't possible. Your body can only adapt to so many things and get stronger and better at it, and you can't kind of pigeonhole all those things together. So I would say it's much more beneficial to continue your weight training workouts, particularly if you're looking at things like aesthetics and building up your muscle strength, muscle endurance. Continue those workouts, add in the conditioning sessions on the side, separate them by a decent length of time, usually 6+ hours, or run them on different days. If you're strapped for time, you can do your conditioning after your weight training, but I probably wouldn't put them together without the awareness that something's got to give. And if you are putting too much emphasis into conditioning because that's what you're trying to improve, then perhaps your aesthetics are going to come down a little bit. Maybe you'll lose a bit of size, lose a bit of strength. So finding that balance, very important as well. So that's it, whole bunch of questions. If you have any questions for me or any comments, please drop them in the comments box below. I hope to see you all continue to support this channel, but also support the future growth of professional wrestling education over at worldbeaterwrestling.com, where you are going to see those weekly videos continue every single week. Thank you for the support, and I'll catch you next time on World Beater Wrestling.